Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Middle Path podcast. This is Mike Escott and
Luke McLean.
The Middle Path is two men living very different lives, thousands of miles apart, but we're sharing our insights and experiences on life, spirituality, and wellness. The Middle Path is a bridge between traditional teachings and modern life. This project is about helping and supporting men to find their middle path.
The Middle Path includes talks, interviews, meditations, challenges, and pretty much anything else we can think of. Welcome to the Middle Path. Mike, we just caught up with Mark Bunn. Mark's an Ayurvedic teacher. He's a TM teacher, and he's got this really nice, simple way to deliver his message to the masses. And I guess his book, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Times, is really where we wanted to take the Middle Path in the initial interview.
Yeah, I was happy that we got to talk to him first, mainly because the ideas that he presents, not only in his book, but in his teachings and the whole program that he presents to everybody, the conversations, is almost exactly what we're going for too. It's like we're taking the ancient teachings, applying them to modern times, and trying to find the middle way to, make it practical for everyday living, for what we're doing on an everyday. So it was pretty cool.
And it was actually a really nice part of the episode, that he spoke to that, the importance of not everyone's going off to a monastery. Not everyone's doing that, but the idea around this insight is to be able to do it in activity, in being active. Now, I thought that was a really insightful part of the interview.
Yeah, I liked it too, especially because the misconception for a lot of that stuff is that in order to find ourselves, we have to go off into a cave and become a recluse and a monk. And that's not true. And it's also not practical in a lot of the stuff that we're doing, in what's going on in our worlds today. And there's an activity and an inactivity that exists in both of those. And to find those moments in your everyday life, that's key. And that's really what it's all about, because 5 minutes can be 5 hours in the mind's eye. You know what I mean? So it's pretty cool. I love that he touched on that too.
We just did the interview. What's the top 3 things that you're going to get from this interview with him?
You're going to get the connection and the importance of finding that time with yourself, the inactive time to actually find the clarity and to have that space or that peace of mind, so you can make a better option or better choices in your life to take you to that next level of whatever that level is. He talks a lot about the different levels of the mind, the physicality, the fear and mind space, and then the consciousness. But then he also goes around and talks about the importance of Ayurvedic teachings and Ayurvedic nutrition and how it all relates and comes together in a full circle.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's pretty much what I had made. I'm like, there's a lot on nutrition and eating with the nature, eating with the rhythms of nature. Like the importance of rest, this idea that we need to rest really well. I think he was big on that. And what I really loved, mate, was that point of what you just said, was this idea of living from your Dharma, living from your purpose. And that's been really the starting point for us in life. So totally. I think there's some gold in this one. So, this is the Middle Path. I'm Luke McLean and
I'm Mike Escott.
And we've got Mark Bunn. Mate, again, really keen to kick off the conversation today and just talk through, again, your experience in wellness, in meditation, but where that came from as a starting point and where that's taking you to, I guess.
Yeah, well, for me, it was a professional sort of sporting career. Obviously, the AFL scene, like many sort of blokey establishments, is, a lot of sort of macho, bravado, testosterone. And which was good. When you're in your early 20s, that's what life is. Even speaking to Michael in the introduction here, he spoke about, the music scene and travelling, and the thing that came to me was, he mentioned when the music stops, what happens then? And that's a classic thing in sports as well, business. Everything we blokes do is often very much results or achievement orientated, and we either achieve the result, and what many men find, even if they're successful, is it's not actually truly satisfying. They think it's going to be. We put all this time and investment and energy into it, and then even if we achieve it, there's something often missing. It's not as fulfilling as we think it is. And then, of course, the other side is when we don't achieve it, we label ourselves as failures, or we compare ourselves to other people supposedly doing these great things. So either way, we set ourselves up for losing, in a sense. And I sort of was really lucky that when I started my sporting career, I also got into meditation. As you know, I did TM meditation at 19, and that was just amazing for me because it just broadened my awareness. As a 19-year-old, it was football and girls. That was it. That was life. And so if you finish your career and that's all you know, then it's a big fall. And so that's what we set ourselves up for. So the meditation and that idea of that there's more to life than just the physical and the material, that there's a spiritual aspect to life. And if we get in touch with that, this idea of consciousness, the non-physical, what we can't see and touch, is what life is. And if we can imbue that into our life, then not only are we more successful as a parent, as a footballer, as a musician, as a whatever we are, but we're not so gripped by the end result of success or failure. And we're able to sort of get into that flow of life where we're doing what I'm sure we'll come back to in the interview is our Dharma, or our higher purpose in life, which is what we're all on this planet to do.
Right on. When did that all start for you? Like, was there a turning point?
Probably the fact that I wasn't very good at football. And I say that obviously, playing AFL, you've got to be at a certain level, but I was exactly that. I wanted to be, a great footballer. I didn't want to just make the grade. I wanted to be a superstar, but I wasn't. I was just made the grade. I was an average footballer at that level, and that was frustrating. My whole life was coloured by how I played on a weekend. If I played well, life was good. I'd walk around with my chest back, my shoulders back, and feel really good. If I played bad, I was depressed. I didn't call it depression back then because we didn't know much about it back in those days. But so, yeah, basically as a late teenager, early 20s, and I even remember in my very first year of football, I finished second in my club, best and fairest, basically. 19-year-old, almost won the best and fairest. And it was like a childhood dream. You're getting free drink cards at the nightclubs. You got, there's girls who think you're good just because you play football.
Yep.
And I remember driving home at the end of the presentation night, and I was in the back of my parents' car. Actually, I still remember it, Michael. This is the turning point. And I said, is all this effort that I'm putting in, because I had to put in twice as much effort as anyone else because I was not as naturally gifted, is all this effort and pain, is it worth it? 5 minutes after you win this presentation, everyone forgets about it. You're back to life. And that was the turning point, that I knew there was something more to life. There had to be more, and that's sort of the journey from there, where it took me.
Man, that's really interesting, Mark. And like, how did that then progress you for that next part of the footy career? Because you went, I think, 6, maybe 8 seasons. Did you have a different viewpoint then on your football from that year, sort of knowing that there was something bigger, and then did that take you on the road to exploration, of self-exploration?
It did, yeah. It was like all of us that go through such a journey. We don't get the clarity straight away, and that's often the first step. Is we know that something's not fully right. We know we're not completely fulfilled. We know something has to change, but we actually don't know what it is. So crystal ball, great. 10 years later, I had it worked out, but at the time it was really, really frustrating. It was like this, you're in this no man's land of wanting the success because that's what you're always used to, but knowing it's not really going to fulfill you, but not knowing what else was there. So I guess at the same time as all that was happening, there was this undercurrent of the spiritual, I was doing meditation retreats at the end of a season when all the teammates were going off to Las Vegas and Bali and throwing chairs out of hotel windows and, sleeping in the gutter. I was going to meditation retreats. When they're doing their pre-season training, I was nasal breathing at 22 years of age. I'm breathing from my nose. I'm doing yoga, sun salutes. I'm sneaking off into the change rooms during a game to meditate while they're listening to Pat Benatar, cranking out. So, it was I knew something was coming, but I hadn't worked it out until probably 8 or 10 years later, like most of us do.
So was that always a calling for you too? I'm curious on that because from my background too, I always was attracted to that questioning, that exploration, and whether it be ancient teachings or just trying to figure something else out, because I too, in my music career was definitely nothing when it came to me playing as a musician, on the scale of a lot of things, but it was the same kind of feeling, whether I was playing sports in, before the music thing started or as it started or whatever else, but there was always that other question. I was always looking for another book to read. I was always looking for something else to do. And I also was more of an introvert too, which is, surprising to be, especially if you saw me play or saw me on stage when I was performing music, I was all over the place. I had so much energy and everybody's like, oh, that dude goes nuts. But I was always quiet and reserved and everything else because I was questioning all the time. Now, and I was always drawn to a lot of the ancient teachings and especially the, Eastern philosophies and whatever else. I'm curious if that was something that just always was a draw for you too, or was that something you just stumbled on in it, or did it feel right at one point, or how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, no, it was a gradual transition, and I said the undercurrent was life's not completely fulfilling at this moment. I think that's the same for all of us. In the Vedic, my Eastern training is in Ayurvedic medicine, or what's called Vedic science. And the term Veda means knowledge, and it's not knowledge of material creation or what, we can touch and feel and is tangible. It's pure knowledge. It's knowledge of those laws of nature that structure our universe and all of life. And so the underlying premise is we're all here for one reason. That is to know ourselves as a spiritual being having a human experience and not the other way around. And so spirit, of course, is all-knowing. It knows everything. Truth resides there. And so if we're not on the right path to experiencing that, nature, the universe, whatever you want to call it, gives us feedback. And the feedback of when we're on the right path and doing that specific purpose or dharma that we're here to do, whether it's a musician as a lead person, or whether someone behind the scenes on the drums, or the manager, or it's different. And so nature gives us that feedback. Happiness, joy, bliss, flow is the green light that we're on the right path. Indecision, lack of clarity, stress, burnout, anger are red lights that, hey, you're not on the right path here. We need to change direction. And so, and of course, the challenge, of course, is not that Mother Nature is never giving us the feedback. She's giving us the feedback to all of us in every moment. It's just, do we have the clarity and the stillness inside to know what those signals are? And that's the challenge in life for most of us.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark, you said something before, and I wanted to go back to it because I think this is a really interesting point, especially where we are. But, being in the grip, and I wanted you to sort of just talk a bit more about what you mean when you explain being in the grip. Yeah.
Well, and I'll jump back and forth between sort of the Western approach and the Eastern or the ancient approach, but traditionally they call it attachment and aversion. And so we live in a world where we're either attached to something, which is this idea of being gripped by something, whether it's the big paycheck or the big house or the fancy car or the beautiful wife or girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it is. And so being attached to something, of course, limits our freedom in life, because if someone takes that away, or we crash the car, or the wife leaves us, we go from a state of happiness which is dependent on it down, usually into a state of depression. Aversion is we fear something. It's almost the opposite side of the coin. You know, we don't want to do something because we're scared. We're averse to it. So either way, we're gripped by external circumstances. And so our whole history of human life, philosophers, spiritual masters, yogis, just enlightened men and women, regular folk, the one teaching that unifies all of them is that we have to go in the other direction, that the answers to life's mysteries and what we're here for and our Dharma and happiness is not out in the external. It's not in the new car or the new job or losing weight. It's go within, Socrates. So it's that spiritual aspect. So really turning life around, going in first and then out. When we do that, we get in touch with that spiritual part of us. And in just mainstream language, it's that part of us that doesn't fear anything, you know, because we have that, we feel that unity with everything we experience. We're not gripped in a negative sense. It's not that we're not emotional when something's good and we don't feel sadness and we don't feel grief. That's part of life. But we're not gripped by it in the sense that we have this roller coaster of life. And again, you know, the great teachers, the great masters, what we might call enlightened or self-realized people, have this evenness, this uniform emotional, mental part of them, that regardless of what happens outside, the hurricane of life, they have this inner calm, this inner silence, the eye of the hurricane. So that's not being gripped by outward circumstances. We don't become, as a teacher of mine said, we don't become a football of life. That means, you know, the football gets kicked all over the ground. We don't go with it. You know, we're masters of our destiny.
Yeah, that's it, mate. Awesome. Yeah, and I'd imagine, Mark, in your career, you could have went a couple of different directions in terms of you could have probably went really spiritual, and I could see you actually, you know, maybe not living in Melbourne or Sydney, but living somewhere a bit more recluse and actually teaching in a different way. But I'm interested that you've applied a lot of these teachings to corporate environments and in the real mainstream, in the hustle and bustle of real life. So how did that decision sort of come about?
Yeah. Well, again, I was really lucky. The guy who taught me to meditate was all actually teaching a lot of the Olympic athletes, even a couple of the other AFL teams at the time. And he gave me a book on, it was actually on sports. I was studying sports science at the time. And it was a book on Ayurvedic medicine and sport, body, mind, sport it was called. And within that, the teacher of the meditation, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, he had this teaching how the spiritual life, it's a great misunderstanding that to be spiritual, you have to remove yourself from the world. He said this whole understanding that to get enlightened or to be spiritual, you have to be like a reclusive monk and you've got to go to the cave and you've got to, you know, get rid of the family. He says that's absolute rubbish. He says for a very small percentage of the population, they are true recluses. You know, they should be by themselves. They're sort of single men, they're brahmacharis, all this. But for a very large percent of our population, we are, he calls them householders. And the spiritual life is not just the spiritual, it's the spiritual part of us integrated into dynamic activity. And he says we need both of them. Just as when we meditate, we transcend, he says it's like dyeing a cloth. If you have a white cloth and you want to make it blue, you dip it in the dye, the blue dye, and you don't leave it in the dye. You actually take it out, you expose it to the sun fades it, it becomes a light blue, you put it back in the dye, you bring it out, expose it to the sun, and each time that blue becomes a bit more permanent. If you just left it in the dye forever, as soon as you take it out, it'd just mainly fade away. And he says life's the same. For most of us, we have to meditate, we have to contact the spiritual part of ourselves, consciousness, but then we need to come into activity to integrate that so that we're not just sort of some lazy, sort of distant, sort of peaceful little monk. We want to be an effective parent or a business person or a musician or whatever it is, and the way to do that is activity. So activity is really important. So that was that was for me. So the question then is, well, what is the most appropriate or evolutionary activity for me? And that's a question everyone listening to this episode should be asking. Because the point about activity to integrate and establish our spiritualness is that it needs to be in tune with our Dharma. Our Dharma is our higher purpose. It's the activity that we're here to perform. And when we do it, we get into that flow state. It's ease. We perform at a high level, but it's not a strain. It's not an effort. And therefore, we're not incurring stress during the day when we're at work or we're raising the family or whatever it is. And this is really important because if we're incurring stress, then it's going to obstruct that spiritual practice that we do. So we want to marry the two together. And that sort of got taught to me really early. So to go out to corporate groups and to talk about Ayurveda and how busy people can sort of still integrate these types of principles while being a parent or a business person or an athlete or a musician is basically my Dharma. So that's what I've got to do.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I definitely trying to get that concept across to somebody who maybe doesn't look at more like an ancient teaching type of thing. It can be very troublesome, I guess. I think that's where a lot of because what you were talking about before is that like there's a search for knowledge and trying to find what our purpose is, what our Dharma is, what the Dharma is. Yeah. And what I'm struggling with a little bit with some of the people that I talk to, that I work with, and just even with my own purpose, it's like is finding that purpose and actually understanding that and doing it through the ancient teachings. But the ancient teachings, because they're ancient, there's like two parts to this too, or two parts of this thought. One, which I'll start with, is one thing I've noticed is that to be human, which is a beautiful thing, it's a gift and a curse in so many ways. We haven't really changed much. These are still the same questions that we're asking every time that we ask them, and every generation, as far as we know that it goes back, recorded history, oral histories, whatever else. And it's the same thing. And we also have the same epiphanies over and over again too. And you'd think it's like, well, we learned this like 3,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. It's right here. It's my dosha. This is my kosha. This is what I do. But no, we don't get there. It's like, it's almost like a beautiful thing that we have beginner's mind every time that we enter this as a new being or as the being that we are. But how do we get those across to modern day times? Because there's too many people that are picking up their phones going, I have 30 seconds of free time and I'm going to doom scroll on my phone, as opposed to like go inward and understand why I'm doing this. It's the attachment or the aversion that you're talking about with that too. Where do you have struggles with that too? Or how do you get that across to somebody in a way that doesn't scare them off of being like, well, I don't want to know what that dude in the cave thought about 3,000 years ago, because I don't need to live in a cave. I live in Hollywood, man. So how do you get that across? Like that's where I'm struggling with, and not only with me but with other people I talk to. Where do you have tips on that? Like, how do we communicate better?
Yeah, great question. That's the eternal question for us as coaches or advisors or mentors. And the three things that come to me with that question is the three levels. One is the ancient proverb, the teacher appears when the student is ready. Mm-hmm. And so often, because we have a, inverted commas, business based on teaching something to other people, we feel we have to force the issue. We have to convince, motivate that person to see things our way. And the reality is that sometimes they're either not ready for it, or, as you say, they just don't give a shit. They do, and so level one is that sometimes we have to let that go. People aren't going to come to this realization until they're at a certain point. And usually, as we know, in a mainstream terminology, that's through the next two principles. One is pain and one is pleasure. Mm-hmm. I'm sure both of you and everyone listening could list a dozen people in their life who got into looking after their health, eating better, exercising more, meditating, doing something in that domain, purely because they had a painful episode preceding it. They had a heart attack, their friend had a stroke, they put on so much weight they couldn't play with their kids anymore, and they got embarrassed taking their shirt off down to whatever it was. There was some painful incident that shook them to their core, that it motivated them to change. So we have to look for either that pain, present to them the pain that they're either experiencing now and not knowing, or what's coming up for them, because that'll make them motivated to then want to do what you want to tell them. Or the other approach is pleasure, which is highlighting how they could still do what they're currently doing, but in a much easier or more effortless or more enjoyable or more effective way. And for men, we know the language we use in that way is, success, achievement, more money, more whatever it is. Because that's, if we start where people are at, and again, another teacher of mine was, you always start on people's level. If just because I'm into all this spiritual stuff, and great for me, but if someone's a parent, core to them is going to be, how can I be a better parent? If they're in a relationship, they want to be a better partner. If they're running their own business, or they want to be better at work. So start there, either find the pain point that you can eliminate for them, or the pleasure part of it, which is how to make it easier, more productive, smoother. Because as you say, the principles are eternal and they're the same, and they work and they apply equally to getting rid of someone's pain or improving someone's happiness and bliss or whatever. So that'd be my thoughts, and I think Luke's got some thoughts to add to that by his...
Well, I'm just interested, Mark, in terms of when you work with someone potentially and you elevate pleasure for an amount of time that then knowingly leads to more pain down the track or more emptiness. They might make more money in the short term because you've elevated that, or they're, become better at their skill, but knowing that there's still that element of emptiness afterwards that's going to lead to more pain because it's not coming from a Dharma perspective.
Yeah, so when I say pleasure is the carrot, that old analogy, you dangle a carrot. Yes, people want you might word it as more money or more success, but the practice, or what the teaching is in how to get it, is what I would call the Vedic wisdom, or this higher wisdom, so that yes, they can't just run off the edge of the cliff. And that was basically, and this is not always easy. I don't want to make anyone listening thinking this is an easy path. This is bloody frustrating. This is like me learning to meditate and the teacher telling me, it's going to help your football career, and you're going to be more clarity and more focus, and it was fantastic in many ways. It made me stress less about how average a footballer was, but it didn't necessarily make me a better footballer, but it bloody well improved my life, which I can see 10 years later, that it took me on another path and it broadened my awareness. And yes, I got into all this stuff, and then I saw football as just a little small part of life. But at the time, it was, it was bloody frustrating. So, and I think those two have to go together.
Yeah. So it's almost a bit of a gateway in to then develop and grow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's always this principle in the Vedic wisdom is, we touched on this idea that everything in life is governed by laws of nature. The easier way to think of it is, we often think of this term Mother Nature. The seasons change at certain times, a baby's born and it grows according to these certain laws of nature. There's an order, there's an intelligence to the way nature works. If we violate those laws, then nature gives us the feedback. And that feedback is discomfort, lack of pleasure. Eventually, if we keep disobeying them, illness, disease, eventually death if we keep going. So it's sort of always there. So that means if we have violated them for a period of time, which most of us do in our teenage life, in our 20s, we stay up all night and we drink and we do jobs just because it's making us the most amount of money, not whether we actually like it or not. So we generally incur, if you like, a karmic debt that we have to repay at some point. So there is going to be some pain or discomfort to get back on the path, but better to do it as soon as we can than later.
Okay. I like this. The other question that kind of popped up into my head on doing that is not so much how do we teach, but because I'm still learning everything with it too. A lot of people will say like follow your intuition. You know what I mean? Like you said, you're talking about feedback. That Mother Nature or nature itself, the laws, govern and give you that. What if I can't hear it?
Yeah.
What if I have no idea that I may be hungry or I may be scared and I can't tell the difference between should I eat something or should I run because my anxiety says that there's a bear around the corner and it's going to eat me.
Yeah. Beautiful. Again, another eternal question. And so to answer it, I think it's good to have a paradigm. You two will already know this paradigm, many will, but it's good to frame it. And that is starting with our Western mindset or our Western way of viewing the world. We see the physical body as primary. And the non-physical, if we call it consciousness, is something like this byproduct of brain activity. And so the physical is primary, non-physical secondary. The Eastern tradition for thousands of years, the Vedic wisdom, is of course the reverse. Is that the physical level of life, and people mightn't see this, but at the top we have the physical, below that we have mind and senses, more subtle. Below that we have the emotional level, the feeling level. And below that, deeper again, in this hierarchy or layers of nature's functioning, is consciousness. And consciousness is all-knowing. If you think of this intelligence that runs our body and life, we spoke about the seasons, babies being born, planets revolving around the sun. There's an intelligence in our universe that governs all that. That same intelligence actually governs our own mind, body, and emotions because it's from the same source. Quantum physics backing all this stuff up. And so what we have to do is to quieten the mind, the senses, the physical level, to experience that. One of the best quotes I've ever heard, and you'll like this one hopefully, Michael, because it's about music, but it was from Claude Debussy. And he says, music is the space between the notes. If all you have is the notes, it's just an absolute jumbled mess. There's no music, there's no beauty, there's no joy in the music. You need the space. And the answer to your question is exactly the same. Our last 100 years of Western civilization has been to more and more activity. We've got to work harder, we've got to push more, we have 24/7 activity. But Mother Nature's formula for success eternally is not activity, it's rest and activity. Winter is to summer what night is to day. And so what we need to learn is not how to be better in activity, it's how to have non-activity, how to transcend. The word transcend means to go beyond activity and experience our source, which like the bottom of an ocean is completely calm, silent, steady. And that is the space between the notes. So meditation, transcendence, getting those gaps in our life, getting off the iPhone, even getting away from the family or work occasionally, just to do nothing, to meditate, transcend, experience that quietness. And in that quietness, all the great yogis, all the teachers have said, that's where wisdom comes. That's where that clarity of, am I hungry or am I just stressed? Should I still be doing this job or is there something better? Am I in the right relationship? Those little seeds of wisdom that just sprout, and you call them intuition. We can't have intuition if life's too busy. It crowds it, it dilutes it. Intuition is nothing other than just the body's natural intelligence. But we have to be in that quietness to experience it. So, and that's often my big practical suggestion for most people in our world today. We don't need a different type of activity to be successful. We actually just need more non-activity. Again, it's like having an eternal summer without winter, or having day after day after day without rejuvenating and refreshing at night. Rest, silence, stillness is the key.
And I guess, Mark, I love that because I've heard you talk about this before, and it's amazing. And in a society that projects that as not being productive or not being, how things are done because it's not as sexy or it doesn't make as much money for companies if around rest, what are some of the tips you get for people? How do you find that solitude or practice that to remove some of that conditioning?
First thing I do, and this is only my personal thing, I think everyone's motivated by others that they see as successful. When I do corporate talks, I inevitably get a parent coming up to me after the talk saying, "Oh, how do I get my husband to do this? Or how do I get my kids to do that?" And the answer is always the same. Don't you tell them what to do, because they won't do it, because you're the parent or you're the partner, or, find someone that they respect that does the same thing you want them to do and get them to, in a sense, tell them. And so what I start to do is I tell them, if they're a business person, I tell them how people like Ray Dalio, who runs the biggest hedge fund in the world, billions and billions of dollars, has been meditating for 42 years. Ariana Huffington, Tim Ferriss, Richard Branson, Anthony Robbins, you can list it. In sports, you pick athletes that now, across the board, the highest level business people, entrepreneurs, the most successful people on our planet, the number one most common thing they have in common is they meditate daily. Daily. They take time out of their busyness to experience silence, to experience calm, because they say it actually saves them time in the long run. So step one is just drill home the motivation that, so many other people are doing it, because people think they're going to be the black sheep, or they're doing something weird, or they're the minority. They're actually not. They just don't know it, because most people don't talk about these sort of practices openly as much. And the second one is just start small. If someone's got 3, 4, like you, Luke, you've got 5 kids, busy job, whatever it is, you're not going to go from that to carving out an hour and a half a day just to go off to your sort of own little room and cross your legs and meditate. Start with 5 or 10 minutes, but it's that principle of you first. Again, it's an ancient one, and particularly for women, this is a big one. Women, as the carers in our community, first thought is to care for everyone else, the kids, the partner, at work, and they don't carve out that time to self-care for themselves. So start small, start easy, 5 or 10 minutes. As that becomes a daily practice, a habit, what we know is a real important step in any lifetime activity is creating it as a habit or a routine. Then build up from there, then take the next step, do the next little thing. But start small, start easy, and gradually move into it.
Awesome.
So, it might be taking a little bit of a turn, but this has also got me going into the whole Ayurvedic aspect of everything too. Nutrition is a big part of it all, not just the physical, even though we were talking about physical starts, with the first, the first step, and then the mind and whatever else. But like you said too, there's certain natures, nature governs a lot of what we do. And part of nature is finding energy, using energy, whether it be through actual physical activity or whatever else, which is eating. We need to eat. We need to do that kind of stuff. And, I first got, I'm definitely a novice on it, but I do pay attention to the Ayurvedic teachings and just trying to understand that and see the connection between everything all together. I just wondered if you could maybe start, just overview, quick, or as long as you want to get into it, whatever you want to do, but on the Ayurvedic aspect of everything.
Sure. Yeah, no, well, Ayurveda is as large as life, so we'll chunk it down as best we can. Even nutrition itself can be a whole episode or two. But for those that have never heard the term Ayurveda traditionally has been defined as the science of life. Veda means knowledge or science, and Ayus means life. And many people will say it's the traditional system of India in terms of their traditional medical system. My training teaches a deeper understanding of Ayurveda. Ayurveda, in fact, is not connected to India any more than anywhere else in the world, because Veda, as we said, is the knowledge of natural law. Natural law governs everything in our entire universe. So although the knowledge of Ayurveda has been kept lively in India, more so than other parts of the world throughout time, it's actually not Indian. It's universal and eternal. And so the underlying principle is that there are these laws of nature that govern everything. How a baby grows, how we digest food, how we metabolize food, how we take light in, through the senses, and how we process everything, basically. And so all we have to do as a human being is to live in tune with those laws of nature. And the analogy I use in my talks is it's like a surfer. Luke, awesome surfer. Any surfer knows that the key to surfing is that you catch the wave when the wave is at its peak. If you catch a wave when it's at the peak, nature does all the work. The surfer just enjoys the ride. It's fun, enjoyable, exhilarating. When I go surfing, I'm usually paddling out when the wave's crashing down on top of my bloody head. For me, hard work, mouthful of water, bloody surfing, because I get the timing wrong. And so there are laws of nature that govern everything around what foods nourish certain tissues and organs of the human physiology, what foods nourish certain body types. So 3 different people can have a cup of coffee. One person will feel exhilarated and enlivened and get through the day with good energy. Another one will sort of not feel much at all, and another one will be bouncing off the walls and they can't sleep for 3 nights and they're anxious and they're worried and they're disastrous. And so Ayurveda has this understanding of doshas, or fundamental qualities or elements in nature. We have hot, we have cold, we have dry, we have liquid, we have rough, we have smooth. And so individually, and modern science is backing this up now, the beauty of Ayurveda is in the last couple of decades, all of its ancient wisdoms that have been around for thousands of years are now being backed up or found out by modern science. This idea of body types, that every individual should eat different foods, also at different times of the year because the seasons are changing, and that there are these daily cycles that we live in tune with, that our main meal should be a certain time of the day and then lighter food at another time of day and exercise here and sleep here, is now being shown by chronobiology and circadian medicine, and also by what's called personalised medicine. In Australia here, the CSIRO, just in the last few weeks, have come out with this whole thing, that personalised diet. This whole old idea of everyone should have 60% of this and 30% of that and this many milligrams of vitamin C is no longer relevant. Everyone has to have a different diet. And so Ayurveda, this has been the basis of Ayurveda forever and a day. And not only individually, but as we touched on, with the seasons. So now in Australia, we're in the middle of summer. So a person that is sensitive to the heat, maybe has skin rashes, acid stomach, an Ayurvedic practitioner would tell them in summer never to have fish, because they know fish is extremely heating to the body. Red foods, chilies, tomatoes, extremely heating to the body. It's like adding kerosene to their fire. And so they'll break out in even more rashes and reflux, and they'll get angry. And whereas they will prescribe cooling foods, good quality dairy products, or bitter leafy greens, or coconut products which take the heat out of the body and bring them back into balance. But their partner, their husband, their wife, their kids, might have a completely different physiology, where they're actually sensitive to the cold and not the heat. So a completely different diet, different exercise regime. So ice baths for one person can be fantastic. Ice baths for another person, in an Ayurvedic perspective, can be absolutely disastrous. hot saunas, intermittent fasting. Absolutely fantastic for certain body types at certain times. Extreme fasting for other body types can be absolutely disastrous for their health. So this is the beauty of Ayurveda, that it gives a very personalised wisdom to what's going to bring someone back into balance for their unique type. So that's just a bit of a play around with some little insights, but we're happy to go off tangent again or dive into one of those points or whatever you like.
Does that, Mark, does that pass at the footy clubs these days if you're no good at ice bars and you can't do them, but saunas are okay?
I was reading an article on Heath Shaw. Michael, you won't know who Heath Shaw is, but he was a very good 300-game footballer at two different clubs, Collingwood and Greater Western Sydney, and he just retired last year, or he got the flick or whatever. But in one of the articles he said I think he'd hardly ever done an ice bath in his whole career. And I think that was just out of, obviously he didn't like him, and he was probably at McDonald's, carb loading up. But absolutely, in terms of an elite athlete with the intense inflammation they get after a game, ice baths for most of them are going to be perfectly fine and good in the right sort of protocols. But for your everyday person, and we touch on, without going into detail, in Ayurveda, there's three fundamental body types, or doshas. A dosha is a governing principle of the body. We spoke about this underlying intelligence. Underlying everybody's individual physiology is intelligence. It knows how to digest food. It knows how to shuttle certain nutrients to certain organs. It knows how to get rid of toxins and eliminate what it doesn't need. It's an infinitely intelligent organism. But it's different for different people. So a person that is predominantly what we call space and air qualities, in Ayurveda it's called Vata, V-A-T-A. These are the sort of people who never put on weight. I call them bastards. They just eat whatever they want, never put on weight. They're as light as a feather. They're music, those really sort of creative musicians, or the Steve Jobs, infinitely creative. They're ballet dancers, they're that sort of thing. For them to go on an extreme fast is going to do what? It's going to increase the space and air quality in their physiology. And I can almost guarantee you these people will get migraines, they won't be able to sleep, they'll get insomnia, they'll get skin irritations, itchy skin or dandruff, their digestion will absolutely shut down, they'll get irritable bowel syndromes and all sorts of problems extensively. On the other end of the spectrum is what's called kapha physiology. Kapha. It's earth and water predominant. So these people we think of them as earthy types. They're often a bigger build. They look at a piece of chocolate cake and put on 2 kilograms. The sort of classic slow metabolism, need to sort of be motivated to do things. For them, more extensive fasting or more regular intermittent fasting, absolutely gold. They'll lose weight, they'll wake up with more energy, they won't need as much caffeine, their skin will clear up. Absolutely brilliant. So there's different regimes that are just tweaked or refined depending on, one, the underlying constitution that we all have, that's our nature, but also the state of imbalance that we have. And that sort of gets into a bit more where you would go and see an Ayurvedic practitioner for that sort of finer knowledge. But the general principle is all summed up by what's called self-referral. And Michael, you touched on it earlier, intuition. Mm-hmm. Each one of us actually knows deep down what foods we need to eat to nourish our cells, what types of meditation or spiritual practice are going to be best for us, what types of exercise, what types of relationships, what types of weather we need to be careful of. It's just we don't always listen. We're all so busy looking at the latest magazine or listening to the latest podcast or what the experts are telling us we need. We just don't have that silence. We don't stop to actually listen to our own body screaming at us about what it needs.
Yeah, because I think, Mark, like you're seeing this now. You see this in the spiritual or the personal development, and Mike, you'll see the same. Like it's like, Wim Hof's owning the ice bar, so everyone's doing them. And then there's like all these, the fasting sort of really popular at the moment as well. And then, so what you're sort of saying, Mark, is for some they'll thrive in that, but again, it's not a one size fits all, and don't get carried away.
Correct, yeah. And look, to be fair, what I know about Wim Hof and many of the other teachers is they actually say a similar thing, that, you know, it's not just this protocol for everyone. You know, listen to your body, do it gradually. You know, the key with ice baths, even in Ayurveda, if someone's in a state of balance, even these Vata type people, if they're balanced, they can do ice baths or cold exposure very gradually. Everything in Ayurveda should be done gradually because it gives the body this time to adjust. The issue we often have with these practices is that people are time poor and they read a little bit about them and they jump in and they do it sort of cold turkey, and that's where they get problems. And so if we do things gradually, oh yeah, I've heard about cold exposure or ice baths or hot saunas or fasting, makes some sense, let's try it out, but just do it gradually. Do a little bit. How do I feel? Oh yeah, I feel a bit lighter, I feel a bit clearer. Cool, do a little bit more. What most people find, particularly with fasting, is that they'll do it initially and they'll feel fantastic. Why? Because most people, we eat too much, or we eat when we're stressed, we eat on the run. In Ayurveda, even more important than what we eat is whether we digest it. Digestion is king, diet is secondary. And so most people have poor digestion, so we build up toxins in the system. We go on a fasting regime, we clean some of that out, we feel better. But the key with fasting from Ayurveda is that it's not a lifestyle. And this is what I see all the time. Fasting is not something we're meant to do all the time, necessarily. It's something we only do to redress the imbalance, if that makes sense. My analogy is like your home. You know, you've just bought an absolutely brand new home. It's never been, no one's ever been in it. You don't go into the home and start cleaning it and get out the scrubber and start scrubbing the marble bench off your kitchen, do you? Because it's clean. What you do is you get all your friends over and you have a party and you have a housewarming and you sing and you dance and you dirty up a bit. Then when it's got so dirty that you're not enjoying living in your home, you clean it. So you bring it back to baseline. And so the body's the same. The body needs food to build up what Ayurveda calls the dhatus, the 7 tissues, you know, the nervous system and the reproductive system and the bones and the muscles. So we need food, but sometimes if we eat too much food or we don't digest it well, periodically, and Ayurveda would generally do it on the seasons. As the seasons change, you know, from summer into autumn, from autumn into winter, winter into spring, then that's when we do the seasonal purification. We do a mini fast, depending on our body type, to get rid of that excess. But it's not something we do every time, and that's why people will often fast, do it for a while, feel better, and then they'll actually feel worse, because they're actually not then getting enough nourishment into their tissues.
And what would you recommend for a beginner then, Mark, like who's going to go on a fast in between seasons? Like, is it like, again, there's so much gap between people doing them for, 12 hours to weeks, like a week. Like, what are you leaning towards, mate?
What I generally recommend firstly is just appreciate the Ayurvedic wisdom of daily cycles. And so again, you remember from the book, chapter 2 is all around this understanding that every 24 hours, our human physiology goes through 6 4-hour cycles. And that is our bodies are doing something different in each of those 4-hour cycles, that if we align our eating habits and our sleep and our exercise and our work with those, we flow. Everything works when it's meant to. And so the big mistake people make in our Western culture is that at lunchtime, when the sun is at its peak, and the sun, which cosmically represents energy, dynamism, heat, transformation, is when our internal sun, the digestive fire that cooks our food, what Ayurveda calls the Agni, the digestive fire, is at its peak. At lunch, most of us were at work or we're at kids' sport. We eat on the run, we throw something down. Then we get home at 7 or 8 o'clock at night when the sun is set in the sky, slowing down. Our whole digestive system is also slowing down in readiness for sleep. We come home and we have, the big dinner for most people, a 3-course meal or the steak and veg and like some dessert, that'd be great. And we connect with the family, which is fantastic. But the body's digestion is basically going to sleep. And so this is where in Ayurveda, 80% of our problems come from in terms of poor digestion, lack of good quality sleep. Because even if we sleep well, there's a whole belly full of food in there the body's trying to process rather than send those resources to the tissues to revitalize and repair. So before I even get people to think about fasting, I get them to try and change gradually their meal timings. Shift their main meal of the day towards the middle of the day, being as practical as they need to if they're at work or they've got kids' sport or whatever. 11 a.m., 2 p.m., whatever it is. But when the sun's out, eat more. And then at night, start eating lighter, more easily digested foods. More of your stir fries, more vegetarian at night, meat during the day if you're a meat eater. And just that alone will achieve 80% of what fasting does for most people. Because they'll go to bed having largely digested what they've had for dinner. Their quality of sleep will go through the roof. They'll wake up with more energy. They'll be more motivated to exercise. Everything will just flow better. And then from there, just experiment with intermittent fasting. And I'm a fan of it. I think it's got its place. And just start with what we would call a 12-12 regime. Okay, so 12 hours of eating, 12 hours of resting or digesting, and then work up to maybe a 14-10 and eventually a 16-8. The 16-8, so is basically the 16-hour window where you're not eating food, 8 hours where you are, is more for those that are quite out of balance. They've been eating far too much or haven't been digesting well for a long period of time. All these sort of slower metabolism, heavier people that sort of need a good sort of spark up to their metabolism. And then the final little tip I always mention is even on a 16-8 regime, one of the common protocols is that people have their last meal at 8 o'clock and then they don't eat until the following lunch the next day. And this is basically sabotaging 50% or more of the benefits of the fast. Because in Ayurveda, we know that from 6 p.m. till 10 p.m. is this cycle where the body's slowing down in readiness for sleep. Because from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. is when the body is naturally at its peak to detox, to get rid of all the impurities out of the channels, the schrotas of the body, to get them ready to be eliminated in the morning. So if we're having our last meal at 8 p.m., we're basically still digesting it right through that 4-hour period instead of sending all those resources to do what the body's meant to. So what we would get them to do is try and have that last meal at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. so they've digested it by the time they go to sleep. And then breakfast takes the role of how breakfast was always historically and traditionally meant to be, to break the fast. Break the fast. So breakfast is just a light meal, something liquidy, because you've been on this extended, longer fast. You don't go straight into a big meal when the fire hasn't been sort of enlivened. It's like kindling the fire when you're out camping. If the fire is just small, as it is in the morning hours when the sun's low in the sky, you don't go and put a big heavy log on it. You put kindling, you put little twigs and you spark it up so that it's hungry at lunchtime. So a light meal to come out of the fast at breakfast or mid-morning is a better protocol for most people.
How do you feel about that, Mike?
That's good. That's kind of what I was hoping for too. So it was leading me to another way of thinking too. It's almost like a chicken or the egg type of thing. This is where my head's going. What's more important, or which one comes first? Like if we're talking about nutrition if we're talking about, or just that whole journey of understanding where your body is and knowing what it needs to be better. Like you were talking about the different levels of the physical to the mind, to the consciousness. Where should somebody start? Do we start with meditation and then the nutrition comes into play? Or do you see, or have you seen somebody that just starts eating better and then all of a sudden they start thinking better and then they meditate better and then everything it's all secular? I'm just wondering if you see, or if you've seen any kind of pattern with anybody. I mean, obviously we're all different, you know what I mean? So it's going to affect somebody different. Doesn't matter which one comes first, but I guess my question is do you see more of a pattern for people? Like what ignites that spark, so to speak?
Yeah, no, we're all different, and yet we're all the same. That sort of age-old understanding. So, without promoting books or anything, I'm in the process of writing a second book. The first book was Ancient Wisdom for Modern Health, which is all these basic principles we've been discussing. The second book, the last chapter, is titled The Tree of Health, and it's the exact answer to your question. So people, where to start, how do we prioritize? There's so many things we can do in terms of our health. And so the tree is a visual. So if you think of a tree, you think of all these different branches, leaves and fruit and flowers, and then there's one trunk, and then what you don't see, or we don't see with the naked eye, is what lies underground, which is the roots of the tree. Again, my teacher, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, has this great quote: "Water the roots to enjoy the fruits." It's one of his famous sayings. Most of us race around and water all the different branches of the tree and the leaves and the flowers, thinking we're going to get, go to the gym, or we exercise and we get our good nutrition and we try and nourish the relationships and we, try and stop the environmental toxins coming into our home and the Wi-Fi. And we often just wear ourselves out and we don't end up healthy. But the trunk of the tree, which is the basis of all the branches, I have Dharma, which is our purpose in life. We spoke about this idea of our vocation, or, this sort of underlying activity that we do, whether it's a educator or a healer or a teacher or a parent or a cleaner or whatever it is, musician. And on the other half of the trunk is emotional health. We all know, we can count how many times that, someone's gone on this new health kick, and as you say, Michael, they're trying to eat better and they're exercising, and then they have a relationship breakup. What happens? They wake up the next morning and there's chocolate wrappers and open pizza boxes and half a dozen beer cans all over the floor. And so the emotional state, we know, underlies our physical state. So it's very hard to change someone's behavior on the level of nutrition or exercise or doing this and this and this unless they're emotionally balanced, nourished, feel good. So the first chapter of the first book is nourish the heart before nourishing the body. I believe everyone, do things that make you happy first before you worry about trying to have a good diet or whatever it is, because that'll naturally come over time. And then the roots of the tree, what we actually can't see, is what we started on right at the start of the episode, the spiritual consciousness. So the answer is yes. My recommendation would be to meditate first. First thing people do, carve out that 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day to just be in silence, stillness, transcendence, whatever it is. Get that clarity, get that calmness, settle the mind down, because then they'll come out of that activity or that non-activity and just naturally choose better foods, want to exercise, make better decisions at work or in their relationship. So as we said, music is the space between the notes. So consciousness first, non-activity is primary, then the emotional health, doing things to nourish that, our passions, our hobbies, our friends, our whatever it is, and Dharma. Dharma is not something that most of us can do overnight. It's something we have to, gradually sort of move towards. But I think we've got those three working on, then the rest of it sort of falls into place. Just as watering the roots of a tree, we spend a few minutes doing that and the whole tree flourishes.
Mate, thanks for that hour of wisdom again, Mark, mate. Always love it. I'm going to hold you to something, though. When's this next book coming out? Because it has been a while.
Yeah, I always tell my family, always ask me, and I say it's a motivation for them to live long. Because well, I've got two coming. I've got one on transcendence, which is a shorter book, so that's hopefully in the next few months. And then the other one, hopefully sometime next year, end of the year maybe. But never hold your breath waiting for my book.
I said I'm waiting with bated breath.
I probably told you the same thing about 4 years ago, did I?
I think I was reading chapters of it about 4 years ago.
There you go. You got to go with nature's timing. You know, you can't hurry these things.
I was just going to say, yep, exactly. Take your time. Take your time. Good things come in time.
Thanks for that. Really appreciate it as always. And thanks for being a part of the middle path.
No, pleasure, guys. And you're doing great work. And hopefully it flourishes from here. And any way we can help everyone's journey, happy to do.
Thanks, mate.
Awesome, Mark. Thanks so much, Mark.
Cheers, bud.